It's 9 o'clock. This is Sky News. Welcome to the show where I interview people who have something to say about the world today and how it's changing. They'll be from politics, sport, business, entertainment, public life, or they'll be everyday people caught up in the events of our times. I'll be putting my questions to tonight's special guests. Good evening. The war in Ukraine has brought devastation across the country. Whole towns have been flattened, thousands of civilians killed and battles raging. But could there be a glimmer of hope on the horizon? Negotiations this week led to Russia saying it will pull back on attacks on the capital, Kyiv. One man has been on the front line protecting his city, Vitali Klitschko. He was once a heavyweight world boxing champion. Now he's mayor of Kyiv and he has the fight of his life on his hands. He's speaking to me tonight. There's the war of bombs and bullets, and then there's a shadow war of spies, lies and information. One of Britain's spy masters, the head of GCHQ, says Putin isn't being told the truth by his security chiefs. But who can we believe? I'll be putting those questions to Christopher Steele, former British intelligence officer, author of that infamous dossier on Donald Trump. He has spent his life observing the comings and goings of Russian spies, so he should know what's going on. Whether he'll tell us, we'll see. Also tonight, in 2020, the discovery of a terrifying new virus changed the world as we know it. Cities and countries went into lockdowns, but little more than a year later, there were vaccines available. It was a truly stunning achievement, led in Britain by a businesswoman none of us had heard of before, but we know her now. It's Bingham. I'll be asking her how it all unfolded and whether we're prepared for the next one. Let's get straight into our first interview tonight. Vitali Klitschko first made his name as a champion boxer. He turned to politics in 2005 and became the mayor of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, in 2014. But he never imagined he'd be defending his city and his people from an invasion by the Russian military. A little earlier, I spoke to Vitali Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv. Vitali, first up, thank you so much for sparing some time to talk to us when you are in the middle of what you're in. Let me start with the military situation now in Kyiv. Putin has advanced on the city, but he's failed to capture it, and nor has he at the moment sought to flatten it with shelling. And Moscow's now saying it doesn't want to put Kyiv at military risk. Are we at a stage yet where you feel you could say that Kyiv is safe?
First of all, it's nobody feel himself safe in Ukraine. If you're in Ukraine, are you in danger? Second point, right now, the huge battle. We're talking right now and listen, it's explosion. It's battle right now north of the city and east of the city.
So you can hear that now outside?
Yeah, I hear right now outside it's explosion. Explosion because in Irpin, Borodyanka, Gostomel, right now they is fighting. It's near to Brovary. It's a small city, satellite city of Kyiv, and that's why right now they circle around the Russian army. We move back, and they moved, but still danger. And we listen all day the explosions.
Vitali, when the Russians say then that they tell us, and we hear these press conferences where they say that they are switching attention away from Kyiv and they are moving their forces elsewhere, you don't see evidence of that? You don't believe that's what they're doing?
Please don't believe Russians. It will be biggest mistake. They told it's not we are in Donetsk, Lugansk. It was not true. They told they don't want to war against Ukraine. It's not true. Right now, the occupation of Ukraine, the Russian forces make war. It's not true. Right now, the Russians told they go away. It's not true. The battle is there. Maybe some part of forces move to another side of Ukraine, but they still around Kyiv.
And Vitali, I think we've got some pictures. I want to show you some pictures that we've been seeing here in the UK. I don't know if you can see them. We have one of Mariupol. This is Mariupol. This is from a drone. And then we also have some pictures from Irpin, which is not that far from you. When you see these pictures, how does it make you feel?
It's painful to see these pictures. The city doesn't exist anymore. The whole building is destroyed. The city is destroyed, and it was a couple of months ago. It's a great part of our cities where very comfortable life, and it was privileged to live in a satellite city near to Kyiv. Right now, the city not exist anymore. Right now, we're collecting the bodies, the people who killed from Russians.
Vitali, when you see those pictures of other parts of Ukraine, are you fearful that this could happen to Kyiv, or do you think that the Russians would not dare to bomb the capital in that way?
I have a feeling. The Russians doesn't have some moral protection, or I don't know. It's they killing civilian. They kill children, women. They destroyed Mariupol. Destroyed more than 50% of buildings in Kharkiv, totally destroyed. It's apartments building. They destroyed half of Chernihiv. It's 150 kilometers, around 100 miles from Kyiv. And I guess they can't use any weapons. We're talking right now about the chemical weapons. The Russians already used that in Syria. And if a couple of months ago, somebody tell me is what I think about the war, I will be, I never expect in modern time in Europe, we have huge war. This war is biggest one after the Second World War. And if a couple of months ago, I tell it's impossible. But right now, if you ask about our hometown, it's everything possible if we look on Mariupol and Kharkiv.
Just on life in Kyiv at the moment, it's hard for us to understand what it's like there because what we see is the reports focused on war. Can you describe what it's like in Kyiv at the moment? Are you able to go to shops? Are cafes open? Are kids going to schools? How are you living at the moment?
Before the war, just 2 months ago, 1.5 months ago, the population of our city was 3.5 million people. We are one of the largest cities in East Europe. Right now, we guess is half population is women, children already left. The majority right now, the men who are ready to defend our city.
Yeah.
The life it's actually war destroyed the logistic, war destroyed the normal life and the people, and right now the streets is empty. It's block post with people with uniform with weapons, territorial defense. But slowly, Ukrainian, the Russian forces a little bit far from Kyiv, but everybody want to came back to city.
They want to
It's
come back.
personal decision. It's I talk to many people. Everybody won't come to back, but it's personal decision of every families for everyone. But it's personal risk for everyone who come to Kyiv. We listen explosion every day, and the risk to die is pretty high. And that's why my personal advice for everyone who want to come, please take a little bit more time. And let's see how situation will be developed in the next couple of weeks.
And Vitali, your family, you have children, you've got 3 children. Do you see them, or have you had to send them away? I mean, presumably you are at risk personally because the Russians have you on their hit list.
My brother Vladimir is together with me.
Yeah.
It's I sent my mom, and Vladimir sent his daughter outside of the country. It's right now this family. It's outside of the country.
So you haven't seen your family for weeks.
More than months.
That's really hard. That's really hard. You are on the Russia hit list. President Zelensky, we know about assassination attempts on him. Have there been assassination attempts on you?
It's everyone in Ukraine in danger. Every citizens of Ukraine right now in Ukraine have risk. I come from a military family. My father, former officer, he's actually died and spent his life to defend the people in Ukraine by Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe what Ukraine have 1986. Father study me and my brother is big privilege. I am former soldier also. It's big privilege for every man to give his life as defender of your country. And that's why we are not afraid. Nobody wants to die, but it's our home. It's our hometown. It's our families. It's our children. We defend our children. We defend the future. We don't want to live in the country in Soviet Union. We don't want back to USSR. We don't want to live in the country where there's no human rights, where there's no press freedom, where there's no rules. I'm talking about the Russian Federation. Because the goal of Putin to rebuild Russian empire and to occupy Ukraine and to rebuild Soviet Union. We was USSR and we don't back in the past time.
And Vitali, you are clearly prepared to die for your country. I think you're saying to me, if you lose your life, you are not afraid.
Nobody want to die. Nobody wants to die. I tell you some example. I train every day. I go to every districts of our city. I stop in by block post and civil defense. I am very surprised. The people with very peaceful profession. For example, musician, actors, doctors. Right now, they stay with uniform. They never expect to take the weapons in the hands. But right now they want to defend his city, hometown. And we always was peaceful nation. Ukraine is peaceful country. We never was aggressive to anyone. But right now, is a question about our future of our children, Vitali, and we have to defend.
Vitali, can I ask you just quickly about your future? Putin clearly wants to take the Donbass region and some of the south of the country. Could you live with Russia taking some territory from Ukraine in order for peace?
Russians right now starting to talk about some compromise. What about we talk? I don't know. Compromise to give the Russians some part of our territory is compromise, is job. The compromise, if the Russians killed thousands of Ukrainians and right now we have to find the solution, I don't know what we talk about, what we have to talk about. And that why, just one wish, Russians go away. Russian soldiers have to go away from our home country. And after that, we're ready to discuss. We understand the Russian army much stronger than the Ukrainian. It's actually Ukrainian soldier, Ukrainian army destroyed mythos about Russian strongest army in the world. I explain you why Ukrainians so tough. Because Russian soldier paid, they fighting for the money. Ukrainian soldier, Ukrainian citizens, fighting for the future of our children. Are you feel the difference between the money and the children?
And Vitali, I have one final question for you then. You're clear that you are not going to let Putin take any Ukraine territory. What about President Zelensky's suggestion that Ukraine could perhaps have a compromise at committing to neutrality and maybe putting that to a referendum to the people? Is that something, as the leader of the capital, you could live with?
First of all, I'm not involved in negotiation process between Ukraine and Russia.
No, but what do you think?
Second point, we doesn't have the final document. That's why we don't know what we talk about. I'm not ready to give the commentary about that. And also the referendum, neutral status. We was always neutral country. We want to be the part of European family. It's our decision. We want to be democratic modern country. It's our decision. And to take away our wish, it's not fair. It's we decide, and we have. We need to be someone who take a decision regarding negotiation and referendum. I don't know how we make the referendum in the war. Big part of Ukrainian right now outside of the country. They moved they to safety place. During the war, we have a lot of questions and not so many answers for that. By the way, let's see the negotiation document. Let's see negotiation letters. What make both sides, and after that we can discuss about that.
Okay, Vitali Klitschko, thank you so much for spending some time to talk to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vitali Klitschko there. Well, coming up after the break, we'll get the thoughts from a former spy, Christopher Steele.
The Cell 8, which I have here in my hands, is the world's first handheld, miniaturized, and very ultra-low-cost defibrillator. And this is being designed from the very beginning to be easy to use and affordable, and we hope that it's going to address the barriers that we have right now to making these available in the public. So the device has been miniaturized so that it works to provide a small electrical shock to the chest of someone whose heart has stopped to restart the heart again. The new design has removed all of the unnecessary components and made it small enough for you to put in your bag or have in your home and have it easily used without any medical training whatsoever. As you can see in the video, it's meant to be snapped in half, and the two halves of the device are actually the pads that stick on the chest of the cardiac arrest victim.
I was at work at a local restaurant to me, so that was a big moment, obviously, in my life, and I'm just very fortunate that there was a defibrillator on site at my work at the time that could obviously be used to save my life, basically. But a device like this that's so readily available will just increase the chances of survival by tenfold.
These devices are available for pre-sale today on cellaid.io, cellaed.io. And the major innovation is that these devices are available for a tenth of the price of conventional AEDs at £199. And we're hoping that that lower price will remove barriers to getting these in homes and in workplaces and available so that more people who can have them close to them and have them save a life when this occurs in public.
I love my job because I get to do something that is contributing to a better future.
Welcome back. The British intelligence agencies have been watching Russia closely for decades, and since the Ukraine war started, they've got their finger on the pulse of the Kremlin, or at least that's what they want us and the Russians to believe. Only last night, the head of the British intelligence agency, GCHQ, said Putin doesn't know what's going on because his closest colleagues aren't telling him the truth. But is all of this disinformation? My next guest says no. Christopher Steele thinks British spies do have a good idea of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, and he should know because for many years he was one of them. He joins me now. Chris, thanks so much for joining us on the show. Before we start to talk about all things Kremlin, let's kick off with Vitali Klitschko and that interview. You just watched it. What did you make of him?
Thank you for having me on the programme, Beth. Delighted to be here. I think people like Vitali Klitschko will be remembered for decades, if not centuries, as the real heroes of this period of our history, and of Ukraine, of course. And a remarkable man, incredibly brave, living in a city which is under siege, which he's possibly being targeted for assassination. I think we absolutely have to take our hat off to him.
He smiled and didn't answer that question, but you think he will have been targeted for assassination without doubt?
I think originally when this operation was underway, yes, definitely.
So a man that really is risking his life every day. Let's get on to the Kremlin and intelligence. So Jeremy Fleming, the boss of the GCHQ, said Putin has made a strategic miscalculation. He said this in a speech last night, launching this invasion. He said his advisors are afraid to tell him the truth. Is that your assessment too?
I think that's part of the problem that you have in an authoritarian system, where there is definitely not a premium on passing bad news and real news back up to the leadership. However, I think there's a more fundamental point here, which is that Russia has always had bad intent in terms of rebuilding its empire and dominating its neighbours. And it's never had the capabilities to match that. And I think the big mistake that Putin's made in this situation, of all the mistakes, and there are many, is that he believed that Russia had the capability to fulfill its intents towards Ukraine, and it doesn't.
And had an ability to do that quickly, and that hasn't happened. And I guess my next question for you is that has clearly caused discord in the Kremlin. The Russian defence minister vanished with heart problems. What's going on? Are they all fighting each other?
Churchill once said that studying the Kremlin was like looking at bulldogs fighting under a rug. You couldn't quite see what was going on, but you could hear the growling and the snarling. And it is very much like that. And one of the problems we've got in assessing Russia over the years is that it's not an open society. It is a complex society. The leadership is not uniform, is not monolithic, but it is suppressed and the divisions are kept behind the scenes.
The FSB, the Russian intelligence services, though, presumably they are leaking information to the Ukrainians. Is that partly why the Ukrainians are fighting more effectively? Is that partly why people like Vitali or President Zelensky, despite having been on Putin's hit list with mercenaries in the capital, that they're still alive? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that Ukraine and Russia are like England and Scotland or England and Ireland, and that many Russians are of Ukrainian origin and vice versa. They're incredibly close, these people, and therefore the thought of destroying your cousin's house and home and cities, and after all, Kyiv was the first capital of the Russian state, is pretty horrendous to a lot of Russians. And I suspect loyalty in that situation is very complex and difficult.
Today, the UK's military chief said that while he expects the coming weeks to be difficult, that in many ways Putin has lost. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I don't see there's a way back for Putin, and I think this is one of the big problems that the West is going to face going forward. I don't see how we can trust Putin in any sort of peace deal that comes now, and I don't see how we can deal with him in terms of normal business going forward. After all, the President of America has called him a war criminal.
If you can't trust Putin, though, in any peace deal, how does it end? Because presumably it has to end with some sort of deal. I mean, Zelensky's talking about neutrality and a referendum. I mean, how does it end if you can't trust anything he does and you can't negotiate?
I think it does end in a deal of some sort, but I think that deal is some way off, and I think it probably doesn't include Vladimir Putin.
What do you mean by that, Chris?
Well, I think he may well be pushed aside out of the top leadership or even possibly assassinated by his own people. The point is that we've gone over a watershed here. I don't believe there's any way back for Putin. I can't believe he can be rehabilitated in the international community. And that's a big problem for us going forward.
It also means he has no incentives to stop fighting.
I think that's true, unless, of course, they start losing on the ground. And one of the remarkable things about this situation now is it does look as though the Russian army, at least in some areas, is being defeated.
And just finally on this, Tony Radakin has said Putin failed to anticipate the unity and cohesion amongst free nations of the world. Are you worried that this Western unity would crack if Donald Trump returned to power in the US?
Well, that's not an immediate prospect, actually, in this situation. There's at least another 2 to 3 years before there's a presidential election in America. It certainly wouldn't help. I mean, whatever one thinks of Trump, he was much more of an isolationist than other US presidents. He questioned NATO's existence and solidarity and the EU, and all the institutions that stand up to Russia were put into question by him. And
Chris, you're a Russian expert. You've studied and gathered intelligence on the Kremlin for many years. You now run a private business doing something similar. Were you surprised when Putin invaded Ukraine?
I was surprised at the scale of the invasion. I wasn't surprised that there was a military operation or a political operation to recognise the breakaway republics as independent. But I had calculated, and others had calculated, that the logistics of this didn't add up. Right. That if you cannot keep down a population of 43 million people using only 150,000 troops, it doesn't work.
So poor intelligence from the Russians?
I think poor advice. I think poor intelligence in terms of what I think Putin was being told, which was that parts of Ukraine would welcome the Russian troops with open arms, and there was a shadow governance structure that could be brought in to replace the current government.
And you said in your submission to the 2018, this is the Intelligence and Security Committee within Parliament that look at matters of national security, you said that Russia was becoming more aggressive, that it was moving from an authoritarian to totalitarian state, and that Putin had to be tackled. Was the West asleep at the wheel? Are we partly to blame for this?
Yes, we are very largely to blame for it, in my view, some of which is perhaps understandable. After 9/11, for example, there was an attempt to draw Putin into an anti-Islamist alliance, anti-terrorist alliance. That failed. But I think subsequently to that, the problem has been that the West has been naive about Putin and very slow to react to his rogue state type activity.
And on the issue of how the West has reacted to Putin, I want to ask you a bit about the relationship between the UK and Russia and about oligarchs and money, Russian money in London. In the UK for years, you were monitoring Russia and the misdeeds of its spies, like murdering people in the UK. And yet you also saw British politicians and businessmen, they'd go into parties and holidaying with oligarchs. Do you think that the establishment here let themselves get seduced?
Absolutely. I think there were the two things going on there. One is an element of naivety, because many of the Russians who come to London are very urbane, very convincing, very sort of westernised. They don't represent the real Russia, if you like. There is a dark side to Russia, which not many people understand. Sadly, I've been studying it for the last 20 years. But I also think, in addition to that, Russian money, a wall of money that hit London, it wasn't just Russian, but it was Russian money first, I think, sort of set up a lobby, a group of interests who serviced this elite, who the lawyers, the estate agents, the PR firms and so on. And it became a pretty important part of our economy. And I suspect also in terms of investment and so on, particularly after Brexit and what have you, when we were looking for other forms of investment in the country. This golden visa scheme, which is now so controversial and in retrospect was such a bad mistake, grows out of that problem.
And there is one person that's particularly been talked about lately, which is Evgeny Lebedev. You said in an interview with Sky last October with Sky News, it was curious Mr Johnson, Boris Johnson, had enabled the son of a KGB officer. Now, it's important that I make it clear Lord Lebedev is a British citizen, has broken no laws, has condemned the war in Ukraine and strongly denies any insinuation he's sympathetic to the Russian government. But his elevation to the laws has been controversial. Would you like to see the intelligence reports around the decision to make him a Lord and put him into the House of Lords?
Yes, there's a parliamentary procedure involved here, which is quite complicated, and I do understand need for confidentiality and so on. But this is such a controversial appointment, and the story out there is that it was against the advice of the security services. So I think it's a pretty exceptional case. And there was a debate in Parliament the other day, and I think probably the outcome of that should be more transparency about how this decision was made.
You have some experience. Would you think that that has credibility, that the security services would have been anxious about this appointment?
I think any sort of family member of a former KGB officer or a KGB agent, and actually Lebedev is not the only one. There are quite a few former KGB officers who are quite prominent in Britain and in business here who need to be very closely looked at. And certainly it's surprising to me that they've managed to operate in this country in the way that they have.
Well, it is now changing, of course, with these huge sanctions against a number of different people and companies. Can I now bring you just to the world of spies? Because is it fair to say that people are right not to trust intelligence sources? It's often disinformation, you often use anonymous sources, yet we're all expected to be reverential about British intelligence. Do you accept that you offer us no truth or proof in anything you say?
I think that's an exaggeration. Clearly, intelligence work is as much an art form as it is a science. And what you're trying to do in intelligence work always is to test out a piece of information, get it from different sources, get it from different types of sources. I think that actually the calling out of this invasion by Western intelligence has been a remarkable operation. And I think that the decision to preempt, to make intelligence public in this situation, to preempt Russian activity, has wrong-footed the Kremlin quite a lot.
That was interesting, wasn't it? Because what happened was things like the invasion, the planning of it, then, you know, the threat of chemical weapons. What's happened is Western leaders who would typically keep that all private have been shouting about it and making it public. What's the tactic of doing that?
It's the information warfare. I mean, the reason that intelligence often isn't made public is obviously because of the need to protect sources and techniques. And every time you make a piece of intelligence public, you are taking certain risks in that regard. However, in this situation where you're dealing with a strategic threat, the invasion of a European country by Russia, the decision was obviously taken that that risk was worth taking, and I think it's paid off.
But it's fair to say as well that British intelligence officers would also deal in disinformation as Russians would, right?
It depends what you're talking about. I mean, if you're saying that we should be spreading disinformation to Russian troops on the battlefield in Ukraine, probably yes. If you're talking about disinformation about our own society, obviously not.
And Chris, how does this end? You've said that you think that Putin, there's no way back for him, that there would have to be some sort of regime change in Russia, although how that could happen, still pretty opaque. Klitschko said in that interview that he was worried, or he warned Europe, the rest of Europe, that there is a danger that this tips into a wider European war. Do you agree with that? Are you fearful about that?
Yes, I think people talk in terms of this being like Munich in 1938, 1939. It's probably equally threatening in terms of 1914, where we sort of slipped into war by various mistakes and smaller countries provoking bigger countries and so on. So there's always a risk that something like this can spread. And, you know, the Poles are very robust. They've talked about having Ukrainian fighter aircraft in their country or provided from their country. So it's very important that NATO remains united. Everyone sticks to the same script. Everyone sticks to the same rules about this in order to prevent this conflict spreading. OK, Chris, I've got more questions for you, but I have run out of time as ever. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Well, look, stay with us. Coming up next, the former head of the UK Vaccine Taskforce, Dame Kate Bingham.
love my job because I get to do something that is contributing to a better future.
Welcome back. The pandemic changed our world as we know it. We were told by the government time and again that the only way out of some of the most draconian restrictions ever seen in this country during peacetime was through a vaccine. My next guest was working as the head of the UK Vaccine Taskforce in 2020, securing the jabs that were still in development and setting up a plan that would make the UK a leader in vaccine rollout. Earlier, I spoke to Dame Kate Bingham. Dame Kate, your task doing the Vaccine Task Force was to source a vaccine, scale up capacity, build capability in vaccine development, then make for the provision of international distribution, and then strengthen the UK's capability for resilience for future pandemics, which actually sounds exhausting just reading it all out. There's so much to talk about that, and also about future-proofing against pandemics. But if we kick off with what you did in the Vaccine Task Force, what was the single biggest lesson you learned in that whole process?
I mean, the single biggest lesson was probably getting the right team together and having a clear mandate and empowering the team to actually do the work that we needed to do. Because everything was in a rush, because every day we took, more people were going to die. So the first thing we did was to actually put together the experts from industry together with the experts from government and agree this is the strategy and this is how we're going to do it. And because there was so much uncertainty, what we did is put in place a very focused set of meetings 3 times a week, so that we at least had a framework with which to actually start communicating what we were doing and talking about progress. So getting that team together, getting a diverse team together, actually. So we had plenty of women who brought real depth of skills alongside the men we had in the team. In terms of learning, diversity of skills, people, thinking, backgrounds, made for a really effective team. And without the team, this couldn't have happened.
Now, it was a success. It's transformed everyone's lives, that the vaccine rollout worked and the vaccine was found. But when you were contemplating this at the beginning, did it occur to you that you were most likely going to fail?
I knew it was most likely to fail. And there were so many reasons why it was likely to fail. The first thing was that we had no vaccine against any human coronavirus. So we had no template or playbook to follow. The second thing was that vaccines historically take 5 to 10 years to develop. The quickest was at 4 years, and that was done 50 years ago. And we didn't know anything about this new virus. So we had so many reasons to be sceptical that this was possible. And to be able to go from sequence to start vaccinating people in a year, which is what we did, was not what we expected to do at the beginning, because we knew that most vaccines fail.
You're obviously a very successful person. Was there a moment you thought, this is kamikaze, I'm setting myself up for failure? How did it come about that you took the helm?
The reason I was asked was because Patrick Vallance had set up an expert advisory group to advise the government on the procurement and identification and procurement of vaccines. And he then invited me to join that advisory group. And my job for the last 30 years has been to develop novel drugs to treat unmet diseases. And so when Patrick then asked me to join the expert group, I asked him why, since I don't know anything about vaccines. And he said, but you understand the small company landscape. And it's that innovation landscape which is actually where the bulk of the vaccines have come from.
So he brought you in because he knew you from industry, but then the Prime Minister personally called you up.
Correct.
And asked you to do it.
Everything's done by text.
Okay.
So you get a text saying, can you speak? So I first got a text from Matt saying, could I speak? I then spoke to him, and he then said the Prime Minister had asked him to ask me to do it. I then said, I want 24 hours to think about it. And 24 hours later, I went back with a list of conditions on the basis of which I would do it. And having established that, then the PM called me.
And that was to seal the deal then, really?
That was to basically accept the conditions, which was 6 months, that I reported to the PM, that I would have a quick decision-making process, that I could hire my own team to be able to get on and do it.
I mean, did you have this moment you thought, I'm going to fail, this is awful, I've been asked to do something, I've got to do it because the PM's asked me, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't know if I can do it?
So, absolutely, I had that entire imposter syndrome, I can't do it and I'm not the right person. And that was because I'm not a vaccine expert. But while I do therapeutics, so what I'm very familiar with is how do you develop new drugs and in patients. But those are for patients who have a disease. Putting something into people who are healthy volunteers is just a little bit different, prophylactic vaccines. And so when I was called, I hooked on the vaccine as being, this is what they're wanting me for. But actually they're not. What they want is someone who can do basically what venture capitalists do, which is put teams together, build plans, figure out milestone-based events which are key to actually the success of the development of the, whether it's the therapeutic or a vaccine. And so there's lots of the style of how venture capitalists work is what was needed here.
And the venture capitalist mindset and then Whitehall, they're kind of different, culturally different, very different things. You presumably met quite a lot of resistance. That's my first question. Then my second question on this is that, is the venture capitalist mindset only applicable in the public sector when it's an emergency situation?
So 2 questions. On the, did I meet resistance? Not really, is the answer. So I had absolute support and cooperation from the PM. And actually, if you've got that top-level leadership, it is incredibly helpful.
Right.
And I established up front that we were going to be putting money at risk without knowing if any of these vaccines would work. So it's what the Whitehall calls no regrets funding.
Right.
And so we'd established the principle that if we wanted a vaccine, we were going to have to put money up front.
There was a lot of scrutiny around you, the fact that you were married to a Treasury Minister, it was all these sorts of, this charge about being part of the chumocracy, if you like, and there you are doing this incredibly hard job and not being paid to do it. Did you ever have moments when that happened, thinking, I've been asked to do it, I've stepped up to do it, and now I'm being publicly criticised? You didn't really have a right of reply. Did you just sometimes think, why have I bothered doing it? Like, why the hell am I doing it? Did it annoy you?
Of course it annoyed me. The challenge is, this all happened just only a few weeks before I was due to finish. And by then, we'd put it all in place.
Yeah.
Had all that happened early on, we might well have ended up in a different place. But
you might have walked, you mean?
Or it just may not, we never would have achieved what we achieved. The advice I got was incredibly clear, which is take your ego out of this, focus on what you're doing and move on, because this will all pass over.
Did it hurt?
And it did. Yeah, of course it did. Yeah. It's very bizarre when you're not used to being in that world, to have a whole lot of people say a whole lot of lies about you and you can't respond. I mean, it's really bizarre. Lily Allen has a great song, and so I used to go running in the dark with a head torch on, listening to Lily Allen, and it was great. And I'm not going to say the name of the song in public.
Will I be able to guess it?
Yeah.
I watched your Romanes lecture. You gave it in Oxford in 2021, and you spoke about how your father, your late father, Lord Bingham, had been honoured giving that lecture. Was it 19 years before you gave yours, or 18? It was one or the other. And you talked about, you spoke about how he talked about the vulnerability of personal freedom in times of crisis. And then I saw you paused and you needed to kind of collect yourself. And when you spoke about your dad, what was in your mind at that moment?
I caught Mum's eye, who was sitting in the front row, and I'd practiced it and I'd said it so many times, so it wasn't as if I was saying it for the first time. But then seeing Mum sitting there, that's what absolutely triggered me. So I then had to say, just stop. And
it was actually a lovely moment,
Yeah, it wasn't, absolutely, but it was unexpected for me. But
well, incredible that you followed your dad as well. And one other question about him, as I said, he was widely regarded as the greatest lawyer of his generation, one of the most senior justices in the land. How did he influence you, your dad?
Not to go into the law.
Okay.
So I went and did, I was very keen, I think, to carve my own path, and that's why I ended up in science.
Yeah.
So nobody else in my family does science. Nobody else does sort of small businessy, innovation, risk, that sort of thing. So I think I'm just a maverick.
Right, let's quickly get on to future pandemics. COVID, is it over?
What we know is we had Delta variant that was really very serious last year. We're now in the middle of Omicron. This could continue to evolve and new variants could outcompete. The question is, will it ultimately end up as a seasonal flu type disease? And we hope that is where it will end up, so that there's sufficient levels of immunity that we won't have this.
Well, Kate, Patrick Vallance, when I've gone to the press conferences, he has talked about this transition from pandemic to endemic, or epidemic.
Endemic.
Endemic, where it does become like the seasonal flu, but you say it's still not clear.
I don't think it's quite there yet.
Right.
And so to the extent, the stat we heard this morning was 10% of children in the UK have COVID right now. So that is still a vast level of viral transmission and presence in the country. So we just don't know yet what the remaining drift and mutations could be.
Is the government ready to scale up in the way it did before, should another virus come along that really threatens the public?
Well, a lot of the scale up has been done. So part of what our job was in 2020 was to put those plans in place. So we basically took the existing ecosystem for vaccine manufacturing and scale up, and 9 different sites around the country we have now funded to scale up into much more significant capability. So we've got a lot more capability here now.
You talked about having someone in government that's responsible for this,
yes,
right?
I think we should be treating it like we treat defence, because we're much more likely to get another serious pandemic than we are to be invaded by somebody.
So a pandemic minister?
Yes, but really serious, not just a...
Cabinet minister?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it needs to be somebody, ideally, that comes in, I think, that needs to have that private sector experience.
Have you suggested that to the PM?
Yeah, of course.
And what did he say?
Oh, they'll take all those suggestions. Well, ultimately transpires, I don't know.
Do you think that we have finally killed the stereotype that science is a boys' subject?
There's a lot of very, very punchy women who were absolutely instrumental in the whole initial COVID response. No, I don't. And I think it's partly because we don't teach our kids in school as to what you can do in science. So people, I still think of scientists as being, men in white coats, when actually it's not that. If you think about what we're dealing with in technology, whether it's phone apps or cybersecurity or how do you deal with climate change, and as soon as you start seeing that all of those are underpinned by scientific understanding, actually that's what's going to get people excited, because these new, younger people now, they absolutely want to help save the world.
Do you think it's a coincidence that the people heavily involved in this vaccine were women?
I think women are very good at problem solving and just getting on with it.
As you did. Well, look, thank you so much. Thanks, Kate, for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Enjoyed
Thanks
that.
for having me.
Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you to all our guests, Vitali Klitschko, Christopher Steele and Dame Kate Bingham. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast. A new episode will be available later tonight. Each week, I take a look at the highlights of the interviews, and there's some extra behind-the-bits scenes set in too. That's on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on Sky News at 10, a special report from Irpin by our special correspondent, Alex Crawford.